They say blood remembers, even when the records are burned, when the names are erased, when the land itself is renamed, the blood still knows. It carries the echo of what was done and what was hidden. And sometimes it calls out. Tonight, we follow that call into the most inbred bloodline in recorded history, a family so secretive that even their graves have no markers, and their story was buried under the weight of its own shame. It begins, as most American tragedies do, with a name you won't find in any history book, the Harrow family of Appalachia. They arrived in the early 1700s, settling deep within the Blue Ridge Mountains, beyond where the cartographers bothered to draw. For generations, they kept to themselves, no neighbors, no churches, no schools, just the hills, the fog, and the sound of something old stirring in the woods. People in the nearby towns whispered that the Harrows were strange. They didn't marry outsiders. They didn't trade. They didn't speak much at all. Once a year, someone would come down from their hollow pale, sun, starved, with eyes that seemed too large for their skull to buy salt, tools, maybe a little tobacco. But they never stayed long, and the ones who dared to ask about life up there came back changed. The first official record we have of them is from 1794, a census report written in a shaking hand. The entry for the Harrow property reads, "Unfit for habitation, population uncertain, children indistinguishable." The man who wrote that note, a government surveyor named Elijah Crane, was found dead 2 weeks later, his neck broken, his tongue cut out. The sheriff ruled it an accident, but no one ever went back up there again. Over the next century, rumors spread like mold through the surrounding towns. Deformed children born under the same roof. Sisters giving birth to their brothers' sons. Eyes that glowed faintly in lamplight. Voices in the trees at night, repeating names that didn't belong to anyone living. People said the Harrows weren't just inbred, they were cursed, tainted by something older than the land itself. But this isn't folklore. The evidence exists, hidden in a locked archive in the county courthouse labeled under unclaimed estates. Inside, faded photographs, brittle letters, and a single-family Bible, the pages so waterlogged they peel apart like dead skin. The names inside repeat themselves again and again. No new blood, just the same handful of first names circling like trapped flies. It's almost impossible to map their lineage cleanly by the late 1800s. The Harrows were practically a closed loop. Cousins marrying cousins, brothers marrying nieces, mothers giving birth to children whose fathers were also their uncles, and yet they survived, somehow, hidden from modernity, forgotten by census takers, their bloodline collapsing inward like a dying star. In 1912, a traveling doctor named Alton Graves made the climb up to the Harrow property after a report of a fever spreading through the hills. He carried a leather satchel, a stethoscope, and a small Kodak camera. When he returned, he refused to speak of what he saw. His wife later found his medical journal under the floorboards. In it, he described a settlement of rotting cabins and a family whose features seemed almost melted. "The children," he wrote, "do not cry. They stare, all of them with the same gray eyes. None appear to know who their parents are. They are all, in some sense, each other's kin." Graves never practiced medicine again. In 1914, he hung himself in his barn. The journal was confiscated by the county coroner, but not before a few pages were copied by a local reporter. The story never made it to print. The editor's note simply reads, "Too grotesque, too real." By the 1930s, the Harrow name had all but disappeared. No living records, no descendants applying for land deeds, no graves officially marked. Just rumors of a mass burial in an unmarked clearing, a fire that burned for 3 days, and the faint sound of singing that could still be heard in the hollow on windless nights. But then, in 1978, something surfaced. a group of hikers stumbled upon what looked like the ruins of a small settlement, blackened stone, rusted tools, and a single wooden door still standing upright, leading to nothing. Buried beneath it, they found human remains, dozens of them, all showing severe deformities, fused bones, stunted skulls, double rows of teeth. The DNA samples taken by the state lab confirmed what some had long suspected. Nearly all of them were genetically identical within a few generations. The Harrows hadn't died out quickly. They'd lingered for centuries, a human echo looping endlessly in the same dark valley. There's one last detail, though one that was never made public. Among the remains was a small wooden box wrapped in wax cloth. Inside, a letter written in childlike scroll. "We are not like the others. We are what was left behind." No signature, no date, just that. The Harrows vanished from record after that discovery. The government sealed the site, calling it mentally unsafe. Locals were told it was contaminated land, full of lead and asbestos, but no cleanup ever took place. No fencing, just silence, and yet, from time to time, hikers still report seeing lights flickering deep in those woods. Some say they hear laughter. Others say they see faces watching from the trees, pale, expressionless, eyes like glass. When you look at the Harrow lineage on paper, it reads like madness. A family line that chose isolation so absolute that it devoured itself from within. But if you read between the lines in the letters, the medical reports, the whispers, you start to realize something much darker. They weren't just hiding from the world. They were hiding something inside it. Because, according to one of Dr. Graves' missing journal pages, which surfaced in a private collection decades later, the Harrows believed that purity of blood could preserve the original spirit of mankind. They thought mixing with outsiders diluted the soul, that the first humans carried something divine, and that it had to be kept intact. The inbreeding wasn't an accident, it was worship, and the more you look into it, the more you realize that the Harrows weren't alone. There were others, quiet, hidden families across the American South, with similar patterns vanishing into isolation, repeating names, repeating faces, repeating sins, like echoes of something ancient that refused to die. What if they were right, not about divinity, but about memory? What if blood really does remember? And some bloodlines remember things no one was ever meant to recall. That valley still stands, unmarked. Silent, locals call it the Hollow of Echoes now, and sometimes when the fog rolls low, you can still hear something faint, not quite words, not quite screams, just the sound of blood remembering. You can trace the story of America through what it tries to forget. Wars, massacres, scandals, but nothing disappears as completely or as deliberately as a family like the Harrows. By the mid-20th century, their land was absorbed by the state. It was labeled as protected forestland, but no ranger ever stayed there more than a month. They all left, each for a different reason. Some cited sickness, others spoke of nightmares. One left a note on his desk before vanishing completely. "They're still here." The state wanted it quiet. No photographs. No media, but that's never how it really works. There's always someone, a clerk, a janitor, a student intern who sees what they shouldn't. In 1981, a graduate researcher named Denise Walker was cataloging old property files when she stumbled upon an unmarked folder. Inside were the original Harrow estate deeds and a thin stack of photographs from 1912. She described the images later in a recorded interview that was never aired. "They didn't look like people," she said. "Their faces were soft, like clay left in the sun too long, but their eyes all the same gray, every single one." She paused then, voice trembling. One of the children looked exactly like an older woman standing behind him, the same face, decades apart. It wasn't resemblance, it was replication. Denise left her job within the month. Her colleagues said she became withdrawn, paranoid. She stopped answering her phone, started burning her mail unopened. When her apartment was found empty 2 years later, her landlord reported a single message carved into the plaster above her bed. The blood runs backward. After her disappearance, the file she described was sealed. Officially, it doesn't exist, but fragments leak always. A blurry scan on an old forum, a copied note from an archive. Each detail adds another piece to a story that was never meant to be pieced together, a family not just consumed by isolation, but possibly directed by it. Because by the early 1900s, something changed in the Harrow line. The records that remain show a strange precision. Births scheduled almost exactly 9 months apart. Deaths recorded on the same days, year after year. Like rituals or cycles, as though someone was conducting them, not living them. One of Dr. Graves' missing pages, authenticated by handwriting experts in the 1990, describes a ritual he witnessed during his stay. He wrote, "They gather in the clearing at dusk, surrounding a small fire. The eldest stands at the center, holding what appears to be a child. They do not speak. They hum the same tone again and again until it becomes unbearable. The child does not move." He goes on to write, "I cannot tell which are parents, which are children. Their faces blend generation to generation." Graves believed they were performing a rite to preserve lineage. But others, like later folklorists, suggested something darker, that the Harrows weren't breeding to maintain purity, but to create uniformity, to erase difference, to build a perfect vessel for something else to inhabit. In 2004, when local historians tried to revisit the site, they found all official maps had been altered. GPS coordinates led to dead ends or impossible terrain. It's as though the valley had been erased from every public database. One researcher joked, maybe the land itself doesn't want to be found. But others didn't laugh. An unverified tape surfaced that same year, allegedly from that expedition. The recording lasts 12 minutes. You can hear 3 men and a woman hiking, breathing heavily, describing the landscape. Then, about 9 minutes in, the sound of something metallic scraping stone. Then silence. Then a single voice whispering, very close to the microphone, "We've been waiting for you." No one ever confirmed the tape's authenticity. The original file vanished before it could be examined, but the voices, the calmness in them felt real, too real. That's the thing about the Harrow story. Every time it tries to die, something pulls it back. A sound, a photograph, a record found where it shouldn't be. It's as if the bloodline itself refuses to be forgotten, feeding off the attention, drawing in anyone who looks too closely. Some believe that's the true curse, not deformity, not madness, but memory. A family so entangled that death couldn't separate them. Their minds, their identities, even their dreams, looping endlessly through each new generation, until there's no one left who remembers being an individual. A 1979 psychological report from a surviving Harrow descendant found living under a different name in Virginia described memories of people I never met. He spoke of knowing how to farm soil he'd never touched, recognizing lullabies he'd never heard. "It's like my blood knows things," he said, "things I didn't live." He refused DNA testing. 3 months later, he disappeared. Police found his trailer empty, the door left open, the television still on. The only object left behind was a small wooden box on the table carved with the letter H. Inside, a lock of hair and a note, "We still hear you. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most." Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you run from it? Or try to understand it? Because here's the part no one talks about. The Harrows may not have been the only family. Across early America, there are scattered reports almost identical of isolated communities obsessed with blood purity. Not racial purity, but spiritual. From Kentucky to the Carolinas, you find graves with repeating names, houses without mirrors, and diaries describing the cycle. One scholar proposed that these families were remnants of a secret sector group that believed the soul could only reincarnate within its own lineage. To mix blood was to lose yourself forever. To them, incest wasn't sin. It was salvation. The Harrows were simply the last ones left. There's one other document, the so-called Ashwood Confession, discovered in a burned-out church near the old Harrow land in 1965. It's written in uneven, almost frantic script. It reads, "We tried to stop it, but the line won't end. The faces return, the eyes return. We bury them and they rise in the next child. It isn't birth anymore, it's remembrance. No one knows who wrote it." The handwriting doesn't match any known local families, but the tone, it's desperate, like someone watching a dream turn into flesh. Some claim that even after the supposed fire, survivors scattered, changing names, moving into nearby towns, blending in. But certain locals whisper that you can still recognize them by their eyes. The gray, always the gray, not blue, not green, something between, like smoke trapped under ice. There are reports unconfirmed of people in nearby counties tracing their ancestry back and finding something odd. A missing record, a gap, and then the name Harrow, faint, almost erased. Some burned their documents after that, some moved away, but others stayed, and maybe that's the scariest part. The Harrow story isn't locked away in a mountain anymore. It's dispersed, diluted, breathing in new places, new names, new blood. When you think about it, how many of us really know where we come from? Not the names, but the blood itself. The traits that resurface when you're tired, the strange dreams you can't explain, the faces in old photos that look a little too familiar. What if those aren't coincidences? What if that's your blood remembering, pulling from something older, something buried? Because if blood can remember, then forgetting might not be an option, and once you've heard the name Harrow, the blood remembers you too. Every story leaves a trail, but the Harrows left something deeper. Not just records or bones, but impressions, places that feel wrong, silence that lingers too long. It's said that anyone who walks into that valley carries something back with them, even if they don't realize it. Some sickness of thought, some echo. In 2011, a document surfaced in a private collector's archive, a letter addressed to the governor of Virginia, dated 1953. The writer was anonymous, but the handwriting was elegant, deliberate. It read, "The Harrow matter is not contained. The line persists in shadow. The younger ones have left the hollow, but they do not know who they are. You will find them by the eyes." Attached was a list of 20, 2 names, none of them Harrow. Every one of those people vanished over the next decade. Officially, unrelated disappearances. Unofficially, another silence swallowed them. Researchers who have studied this case describe a pattern not of coincidence, but of contamination. The Harrows were never a family in the ordinary sense. They were a vessel, a line engineered by belief and ritual to hold something that couldn't die. An idea, perhaps, or worse, a memory so ancient it required flesh to contain it. You see it in their artifacts, in the carvings found near their settlement, circles of figures, all identical, surrounding an empty center. In the journals, the repeated phrase, "We return to ourselves." In the lullabies sung in their dialect, with words that don't exist in any known language. Words that sound more like mourning than comfort. Those who have read the recovered fragments say that after a while, the repetition seeps into your head. You start hearing the rhythm in your breathing, in the ticking of a clock. It's not just language, it's a pattern, like a pulse older than speech. The deeper researchers went, the stranger it got. In one of the last recorded interviews before the archives were sealed for good, a local historian named Thomas Red said, "It isn't that they were inbred. It's that they folded in on themselves, like time bending inward. He was found dead 2 days later, his study ransacked, every photograph of the Harrows missing. There's a theory whispered among those who study the forbidden corners of genealogy that the Harrow bloodline wasn't an accident of isolation, but a deliberate human experiment. The idea was simple, terrifying. Could memory itself be made hereditary? Could consciousness be preserved through generations by removing the variables of outside blood? Imagine a family that remembers not through stories or records, but through the body itself. A family that carries every face, every sound, every secret endlessly repeated, endlessly refined. It's not immortality, it's worse. It's never-ending identity. A single mind stretched across centuries, trapped inside its own descendants. Some even believe that's why the Harrows never left their hollow, because leaving would mean dispersing the memory, breaking the circle, and they couldn't let that happen. When you think about that, the idea of a bloodline being both the prison and the key, the reports of what came after start to make sense. Sightings of strangers in small towns who never age, families with identical children born years apart. The stories sound ridiculous until you realize they've been repeating for centuries, just under different names. A folklorist once called it the echo inheritance. The theory that trauma and memory pass not only through DNA, but through something older, something that chooses to survive. If that's true, then the Harrows are not gone. They've only changed their skin. A few years ago, a photographer hiking near the old Harrow Valley captured something strange, a cabin, untouched by time, though no such structure appears on any map. In the photo, there's a figure standing at the doorway, pale, thin, watching. The face is hard to make out, but the eyes, those same gray eyes, seem to glow even in daylight. When the photographer went back a week later, the cabin was gone. The locals say you can still see faint firelight between the trees at night, always in the same place, never closer, never farther. If you call out, it vanishes, but sometimes it calls back. Maybe that's what the Harrows were trying to warn us about in their final letters, that memory is not passive, that blood keeps what it wants to keep, and that once a story like theirs touches you, you carry a piece of it. You feed it, you become part of its preservation. That's why their graves are unmarked, why the land is closed, because even in death they were still transmitting, still remembering, still folding time in on itself. And maybe, just maybe, that's what history itself does. It consumes the curious, it rewards the silence, it buries the witnesses in the same dirt as the guilty. If you ever find yourself near that part of the Appalachians, you'll know when you're close. The air grows heavier, the birds stop calling, the trees lean inward as though listening, and if you're unlucky enough to hear a faint humming, low, rhythmic, endless, don't stop to listen, that's not wind. That's not insects, that's the blood singing to itself. You might feel drawn to it, like an ache in your chest, a strange warmth behind your eyes. Don't look too long. Don't think their name, because that's how the Harrows found each other, through memory that felt like curiosity, through the ones who couldn't look away. And if you do see them, the pale faces, the gray eyes watching from between the trees, don't run. They don't chase. They wait. They know you'll come back, because the moment you start asking about them, something of theirs starts asking about you. That's how it spreads, not through blood, through attention, through fascination, through you. And so, the most inbred bloodline in history never really ended. It simply dissolved into the world, a whisper in the soil, a name in the throat, a pulse in the dark. Waiting for someone to remember, the Harrows wanted to keep their line pure, untouched, eternal. In a way, they succeeded, because now, hundreds of years later, we're still speaking their name, still feeding the memory they built with generations of silence and suffering. Some truths don't die. They just wait for us to dig them up again, and when we do, they remember us too. That's the price of knowing. That's the curse of looking into the eyes of the past.